Motherless Child by the Reverend Amy Friedman. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Here, may you find a warm greeting, a kind word, a gentle touch. Sometimes I feel like I have no friend. Here, may you find a community of support, a pulse of liberation, a vision of hope. Sometimes I feel I am almost gone. Here, may you find a song to sing, a moment of silence, a hand to hold. Even when you are a long way from home, may these walls give you shelter, and may this community break through your loneliness. And may you feel the embrace of a larger spirit of love and life. You are welcome here. Come, let us worship together this morning.
Of hope and labor and love, and a grounded history. It is also built of promises made to and kept by people who came before us, and the promises we have made to one another and ourselves. The words we say today are a covenant, a promise to honor our tradition and our future, and we bring all our gifts together to strengthen our community with the bonds of belonging.
New members, you are joining this congregation, Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Goleta, because you share the purpose and principles that we affirm and promote. Do you agree to uphold the mission of Live Oak, that our generations join together to nurture spiritual growth and personal transformation, that we may be inspired to transform the world with love, hope, compassion, and justice? Please respond, we do.
We do.
Do you agree to support others and seek the support you need here, as well as contributing to your time, talent, and treasure so that we may grow together?
We do.
Continuing members of Live Oak Congregation, will you welcome these new members with open arms and open hearts and include them fully in the life of the congregation?
We will.
So we've talked about why we come together as members of this beloved community, but we also need to lift up the how we agree to be together. And on the back of your orders of service, you'll find our covenant of good relations. And so I'm going to have us read it as a responsive reading, with this half the congregation doing the first and this half the congregation doing the second. And we'll get some, perfect. Okay, so everyone together will read in my interactions, and then we'll start with welcome on this side. All right, so here we go. In my interactions with others in this congregation, I will
Welcome with open heart and mind those who wish to call
speak honestly and directly to the persons with whom I have a concern, using thoughtful, compassionate language. Good intentions in those with whom I disagree. Listen deeply to and actively seek resolution with those concerned before engaging the Committee on Shared Ministry or the Board of Trustees in conflict mediation. Forgive the errors and shortcomings of myself and others who contribute to our shared ministry, and express gratitude for the many gifts we bring. expect divergent beliefs and opinions, and persist in respectful dialogue, especially in times of uncertainty, remaining open to new understandings and possibilities that bring vitality to our congregational life. Express opinions on congregational issues with the intention of helping to make this congregation a better place for myself, Live Oak members and friends, and those who have yet to cross the threshold of our beloved community.
I now invite each new member to sign our membership book. And after you do, please light your chalice, your new chalice, which is a gift from us, from the communal light of our congregation's chalice. So stay up here, Kevin.
So we're having them light from our communal chalice to individual chalices that they can then take home with them after service today. It's okay. She didn't want to come.
Oh, okay. All right. As we would also like to present you with a gift of a living plant to symbolize both our welcome and our hope that we will grow and flourish together through the years. These are beautiful plants that Priscilla has nurtured for a while and is now passing along for you.
Sure.
I just want to say a little extra about the plants. They come from my garden. Although they're a little spiny and prickly, you have to be careful with them. It's no reflection on your personality or mine, but it shows how our influence spreads out into the community. And also, they're all a little bit different, just like we are all a little different in the talents and the gifts that we bring to Live Oak. But they have to be nourished in order to thrive and grow, just like your membership here at Live Oak. So, enjoy them.
And so we'd like each member to just say your name and maybe one thing that you'd like to share about yourself to the congregation. It could be what you've done professionally, where you stand theologically, or something you like to do.
All right, so we'll start with you.
I'm Kevin Rose. I come out of the liberal Episcopal tradition, and I wanted to say that lighting from the common candle was very meaningful for me today. For we do this in the Anglican tradition, and also our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters do this every Easter, where they light one fire on the night before Easter and then pass that new fire around, and to hear the story of creation read in a dark room with just lit by candles is, wherever you stand theologically, it's just an incredible experience.
I'm Fiona Knox. My husband is Richard Zerwa over here. I'm very happy to be a new member of this congregation. I was born a Unitarian, so I had to learn to appreciate it more than some of you people who are. In any case, I've had the privilege of working for 5 years in one of the Unitarian offices for the West Coast. I've had the privilege of being very active with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, some of the things that you all, as new people, can look forward to. Thank you for becoming my new family in Southern California, all of you.
Thank you.
I'm Gil Green, and Diane and I, we're from San Diego. So we're totally new to Goleta. I've never joined anything or been churched in my entire life, so we're both totally new to the UU Church. I'm a retired psychiatrist, for what that's worth. Not much. And we're very happy to be a part of this congregation.
Hi, I'm Diane Green, and since leaving the Catholic Church some 40 plus years ago, I feel that I found my first spiritual home.
Thank you.
So
So
I've been inspired by Reverend Tamara's teachings, and also by the very friendliness of everybody here. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's give all of our new members a warm welcome. No matter what kind of week you've had this past week, I invite you to listen to our meditational reading this morning carefully. It's written by the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, and see if you can recognize yourself in one of these lines. And then hold on to that image as we remain in silence after the reading. In the midst of a world marked by tragedy and beauty, there must be those who bear witness against unnecessary destruction and who, with faith, stand and lead in freedom with grace and power. There must be those who speak honestly and do not avoid seeing what must be seen of sorrow and outrage, of tenderness and wonder. There must be those whose grief troubles the water while their voices sing and refresh our world. There must be those whose exuberance rises with lovely energy that articulates the earth's joy. There must be those who are restless for respectful and loving companionship among human beings, whose presence invites people to be themselves without fear. There must be those who gather with the congregation of remembrance and compassion, draw water from old wells, and walk the simple path of love for their neighbor. And there must be communities of people who seek to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God, who call on the strength of the soul force to heal, transform, and bless life. There must be religious witness. Please join me in a few moments of silent reflection. So this sermon today is sort of a bookend sermon. Started the month talking about Unitarian Universalism evangelism, and today we're talking about Unitarian Universalist theology. And those who were at the Path to Membership gathering yesterday could probably come up here and preach this sermon, because that's what we did yesterday. We talked a lot about Unitarian Universalist theology. And the title of the sermon today is 5 Smooth Stones. And as you may know, this is a reference to David and Goliath from the Jewish and Christian scriptures. It's also a reference to an essay by a very famous Unitarian minister, James Luther Adams, whose life pretty much spanned the 20th century. But let's begin with David and Goliath, just as a refresher. So, story of David and Goliath, you have the Israelites up on one hill, and you have the Philistines up on the other hill, and a valley in between, and they were at a standoff, because in those days, you know, you're kind of a sitting duck if your army decides to be the one to go into this valley that was between them. So what they decided to do to solve the dispute was called, actually back in those days, this was a way of reducing bloodshed in some situations, called a single dispute, where each side would send their most powerful warrior down, and the two of them would duke it out, and whoever won that whole side would be victorious. I think they really had something there, you know? So anyway, the Philistines sent Goliath, this enormous man, and he's decked out in full armor, and he's got swords and every kind of weapon that you can imagine for the time. And Goliath stands down in the valley, and he's calling up to the Israelites saying, "Send down your best warrior." And the Israelites are scared. And David is a shepherd boy and young man, and he happens to come to bring food to his brothers who were actually in the Israelite army. And he hears what's going on, and he goes to King Saul and he says, you know, I can be the volunteer for our side. And King Saul says, no, you scrawny little thing, no, that will not work out. But he prevails, and King Saul tries to dress him up in the armor to go down there. And David said, no, that is not me. That's not what I'm comfortable with. And he went down. First he picked up the 5 smooth stones from up there in the mountains, and he says, you know, I'm a shepherd. I've fought off lions and bears. I know what I'm doing. So he picks up his stones, puts them in his pouch, and goes down, and as he has his staff also in his hand, and he starts to approach Goliath. Goliath is really pissed off, because he sees this guy coming at him, not in armor and not with, all the weaponry. He's just this simple person with no armor and with this staff. And he says, you know, am I a dog that you're coming at me with only this stick? And in response, David takes a stone out of his bag. Now, he's not a little boy with a slingshot. He is a young man who probably has been trained as a slinger, which was actually someone who is very important in warfare in those days, very trained to be able to hit a mark. And so he goes in, takes out the stone, does whatever I'm imagining is probably a motion like this, you know, and swings, you know, the stone, hits Goliath square in the middle of the forehead. Goliath falls down. David finishes him off with his own sword. Sound familiar? Okay. So in our culture, this story is heard and understood as a story of the triumph of the underdog over the powers that be, or powers greater than the every person. And in one sense, that could be enough, saying, take heart, there's power in the noble stand of one person. Each of us can make a difference. But interestingly, there's more to this story than meets the eye. There are 2 important aspects that are not commonly talked about that include sort of takeaways from this wisdom story. One is that Goliath's expectation is that the Israelites will send a person similar to himself. he's expecting an infantry person heavily armored coming at him. He's expecting to prevail in hand-to-hand combat. This expectation proves inaccurate, and it also proves to be his undoing, as he's basically a sitting duck to David's expertise with the sling and a stone. And a second takeaway is that what is seen as our greatest strength can sometimes be our greatest weakness, and vice versa. Sometimes what is seen as our greatest weakness can sometimes be our greatest strength. So Goliath, this giant with armor, found that his greatest strength was actually a liability in the battle with the more unencumbered David. And David, who was turning down the armor, actually his lack of armor turned out to be his greatest strength. But what of the 5 smooth stones? In this story from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, David picks up these stones to prepare for his battle with Goliath. And David's stones were weapons to fight off a much stronger oppressor. And the Unitarian minister, James Luther Adams, who I mentioned before, his stones are protection of a little bit more peaceful type than David's. In a 1939 essay entitled Guiding Principles of a Free Faith, James Luther Adams uses this image of the 5 stones of liberal religion and sees these stones as the basis of the power that we can wield in the world. Indeed, sometimes those of us who claim Unitarian Universalism as our home might sometimes feel a bit like David, struggling against the multiple Goliaths that face us in our world. There is much to be done in the struggle for justice. So I understand Adams' choice of this imagery. Adams was a Unitarian, later a Unitarian Universalist minister, and he was probably our greatest theologian of the 20th century. And although he was an American, he spent a good deal of the 1930s in Germany, just as Nazism was coming to power. So this image of countering a powerful force takes on another layer of meaning, knowing that about him. And for us, Adam's 5 smooth stones present us with a core set of values and principles that help us define our liberal religious tradition. This framing also gives us an opportunity to reflect on whether we are living up to these 5 core values. So the first smooth stone that he says is that religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous, which means that the truth is neither static nor absolute. There's no truth with that capital T that we teach to our children and youth, and no creed that new members must swear to uphold as they join our ranks. We believe that new truth is ever emerging, and everything in existence is subject to critique and, as appropriate, modification. This first smooth stone, that revelation is continuous, calls upon our capacity to think and reason, to question openly and honestly, and to be able to change our minds. We call our faith a living tradition because we're always learning new truths, and like a living organism, we change and grow. Now, I want to stress this first aspect because although it seems like a given, and we're well known for being open and searching and questioning, this is not the easiest stone. We're human and we get set in our ways and might just become a little rigid in our thinking. So this stone, affirming that revelation is continuous, reminds us stay open to change. Nothing is permanent. Stay open to change with an open heart, and maybe even actively seek out new and different things in how we live our faith. The second smooth stone is that relations among people should be based on free consent, not coercion. This is the basis for our very democracy itself, which, as we say, that we promote the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. And I think of this stone sort of as 2 C's, because it reminds us that relationships are to rest on free consent, but that also leads us to the other C of covenant. When we come together, we make a promise to each other. We covenant to walk together in right relations. We covenant to strive to live up to our Unitarian Universalist principles. We covenant to stay at the table, both here in our congregation and as we carry our Unitarian Universalists out in values out into the world, to stay at the table, stay in the struggle, stay in the conversations. Like any relationship, there are ups and downs. But when we say that we're in covenant, we promise to listen deeply, to speak gently and respectfully, and try to really listen to another's point of view and conviction. And we're also confirming that it's not just about each of us as individuals. We gather from so many different places and points of view. I'm fond of saying that if you gather a bunch of Unitarian Universalists together, there are many points of view, and if you gather a small group of many Unitarian Universalists together, you have many points of view, and if you gather one Unitarian Universalist, you still have many points of view. And even if our view doesn't prevail, we're drawn together for a larger purpose. Sometimes we need reminding that these minute details of our personal and congregational life are just that, details. Step back and look at the larger picture, our larger purpose. We consent to stay together on this journey toward a higher purpose. Third smooth stone. Adams reminds us that religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. It is this which makes the role of the prophet central and indispensable in liberalism. I love his words, so that one I quoted directly from him. In other words, as a religious people, we have a moral obligation to work to establish a more just and loving community, both within our congregation and the larger world. Our church doesn't exist solely for our benefit. It's what we do to take our values out into the world. This very faith that holds us and sustains us brings with it principles, a prophetic imperative toward creating the beloved community. We're not asked to be a social club as much as this congregation loves parties, and I do too, so that's all good. But we're asked to be more than that. We're asked to do nothing less than the work of creating heaven right here on earth, right here, right now. This stone calls us to look at the ways that we're either building up this just community or destroying this community. Are we choosing wisely how we spend our financial resources, our resources of time, the resource of our very life? Are we thinking ahead for 7 generations, as Chief Seattle urged us to do, working to create a world that will be better than the one that we inherited, creating a just and loving community, creating justice with our hands and our feet and our hearts and our voices. The fourth stone, which I think flows from number 3, is that that good things don't just happen. It's people that make good things happen. The way he put it, a little more eloquent, is, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. Good must consciously be given form and power within history. I love that. This speaks to the concept of agency, the reality that each of us has power, and it's for us to come together and use that power for good in the world. I picture James Luther Adams watching the changes sweep through Germany in the 30s, watching people fall into line with the Nazi agenda, and wonder that if this stone that he lifts up flows at least partially from that experience, that good people need to be there to make things happen. The fifth and final stone ties with my newsletter article in the leaflet for November. This stone reminds us that we are, as a liberal faith, hold all the resources we need for change, and that this very fact justifies an attitude of optimism. This doesn't mean that change will be easy or quick, but it lifts up the fact that we have what we need. We have all the resources we need if we just have the energy and the courage and the wisdom to use those resources. And this understanding ultimately leads to the hope and the optimism that is part of our general nature as a faith movement. Hope that we can indeed effect real constructive change. Hope that with faith as our ground, we can sustain this optimism for the long haul. Hope that holds up a vision of a world as it can be and not seeing it as it currently exists. Hope that proclaims that in the face of present injustice, that there is a justice to come. In the face of fighting and wars, that there is a peace to come. And hope that in the face of present hatred and fear, that there is a love to come. I propose that to Adam's 5 smooth stones, that we add 2 rough pebbles. Not so much the core values and traditions that help define our faith, as I've been talking about, but these are more tactics that we can keep in mind as we embody these core values. Remember the story at the beginning of David and Goliath? So the first rough pebble that we take from that story is that when we expect something and are convinced of something, we may not be open to change, to divergent thinking, to the joyous element of surprise and change in our lives. Goliath expecting David to be a large warrior in full armor, and he was caught with his guard down because of his expectations. So as we go forward, may we remain open and flexible in our thinking and in our lives. And the second rough pebble might be to remain aware that our greatest strength might just be our greatest weakness, and our greatest weakness may ultimately be our greatest strength. May we seek to know that our strengths and weaknesses come from all angles and look at them for all of the possibilities that they hold as we move forward. And remember always that together we have the power to change our lives and to change our world. Amen. Blessed be. Diction. Everybody jump in and grab a hand. Perfect. Our faith, this congregation, is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. Let us pause in silent witness to that unity. And as you go forth into your week ahead, may the blessings of love be upon you, may love's peace abide with you, and may love's presence illuminate your heart, now and forevermore. So be it. Amen, and blessed be. And now, as we extinguish the light of our communal chalice, now our service truly begins. And would everyone please join in our response? And I know this is a little bit different. Usually right here we have a very short response, but this is a favorite song of mine. So we're actually singing an extra verse. You can remain holding hands if you're comfortable, and we're singing "Love Will Guide Us."